In this video, I'm going to make a sample drawer and go through the process from start to end. It's always a good idea to build a sample drawer before and learn through that before building the actual final drawers. So let's begin with the fundamentals. So what does the drawer need? It needs the four walls and a base, right? So you have the side panels and you have the front and back panels and you need a base. The easiest way to build a drawer is to just take all these panels together and glue them and screw them. And you can take the bottom panel and just stick it with the glue and nail from the bottom. That's the easiest way, but it's not necessarily the best way. If I need a good drawer that will last for a long time, the joints matter, and the quality of plywood matters, the quality of the base matters, how thick it is. So let's move on to kind of the kind of joints that can be used. This is a dovetail joint. In my opinion, the best joint is the dovetail joint, but I don't have the time, the skill, the patience to do those for all the drawers that I have, so I need to find some alternate methods. The one method I was debating was using this lock miter bit. It's a special router bit that makes 90-degree joints. It looks something like this. I made a sample joint. It goes in like this. It's a pretty good joint, very strong. It has a lot of gluing surface, but it takes a lot of time to set up, and it requires a pretty good accuracy to make the joint work properly. The other option I had was to use the drawer lock bit. This is a special router bit just to make drawers, and that looks something like this. And I like this one because it was easier to set up than the lock miter. You can see here how the joints go in like this. This is usually the front of the drawer, and when you pull the drawer or push the drawer, you can see the force hook into the side piece. So this creates a very strong joint. So like I said, this is the front and this is usually the side panel of the drawer. So I decided to use this router bit, the drawer lock bit, to make all my drawers. So all specialized router bits like the drawer lock bit come with instructions, and apparently we have to follow the instructions to the letter for this to work. It gives you here how the horizontal and the vertical workpiece is cut on top of the router bit with the help of the router fence. I think overall there are three parts to this as I read it. The first part is making sure that the height of the router bit is exactly 3/8 of an inch, and that's common to both the horizontal cut and the vertical cut. The second and the third part is then cutting this piece on the horizontal, making sure that the distance from the fence is exactly the width of the plywood in use, and the third is the vertical cut, where the notch is just a notch that is cut into the into the workpiece. This is the face of the drawer, and this is the side panel of the drawer. So this is the front and back, and these are the two sides. Before we start cutting out pieces with the router bit, we need to make sure we prep the pieces. We need to understand and mark first where we're going to cut. So I marked the pieces over here. I know this piece is going to be the front, and this is going to be the back. This is going to be the left and right piece. I also gave an arrow mark to indicate which piece is going to be facing on the outside and which is going to be the inside face. And I did that for all the pieces. Now I know where to cut. The second thing we need to know is to understand the grain direction. In my example, the grain direction is going up and down. If it's a bigger drawer, I think some people recommend to have a grain direction that goes left and right instead of up and down. But whatever grain direction, it has to be consistent on all four sides. The third thing, sometimes we have to deal with, especially with bigger drawers, if there is a bow or a bow on the drawer. Sometimes plywood is not straight; it's bowed like this, either on the outside or on the inside. So if there is a bow, then we need to make sure that the curve is towards the inside of the drawer, so that there won't be fitting problems if the bow is on the outside. But usually with smaller drawers, it shouldn't be the case. But this is what I do to prep the drawers first. Like I said before, the drawer lock bit needs to be adjusted for height as well as the depth of this fence. So we need accurate and easy way to measure that. For that, I'm using these brass height gauges that I got off Amazon. This is made by Whiteside company, This is basically exactly height bars, so to speak. They come in different measurements, half inch, 3/8, and smaller ones. I found this very useful to set up the drawer lock bits, and I'm going to use that soon. The first critical thing common to both the horizontal and vertical cut is to make sure that the router bit height is 3/8 of an inch from the top of the router table. For that, I'm going to use a 3/8 of an inch height gauge bar. Just put it against the blade and make sure that the top of the router bit blade is flush and aligned with this height gauge. I also go one step ahead and use another gauge bar, just any basically, or a ruler, and look from this angle to make sure there is no light spilling out either on the gauge or on the blade. Sometimes you will see light spilling out if it's not properly aligned. It's just another trick. But this completes the first critical adjustment, that is 3/8 inch of a height. So the first cut and adjustment I have to make is the horizontal cut. The horizontal cut is for the front and back of the drawer. The piece moves horizontally, of course, against the router bit blade. Now for that I have to adjust the fence. That means I have to move back or forward the fence. The fence needs to be behind this tip of the router bit blade at a certain distance, and that distance is equal to the exact width of the plywood I'm using. So I'm taking the side wall of the drawer, the plywood, putting it over here, and I take my gauge bar, again useful, to push it against this side panel. Now I have the distance from the fence to the gauge bar, to the edge of the gauge bar, is exactly the width of the plywood, of course. So now I move the fence back and forth to make sure that the tip of this blade is barely touching the blade. So the tip of the blade is barely touching the gauge. If it touches the gauge and pushes it forward, that means my fence is too much in the front, so I have to push it back. If it doesn't touch the gauge at all and I see a visible gap between the blade and the gauge, then I know the fence is too back, so I have to pull it forward. But I make several adjustments back and forth to make sure that the router bit blade is barely touching. I can even hear a sound when it touches, but it doesn't move the gauge. So that tells me it's properly configured. Now I'm going to cut the horizontal pieces. I'm going to use my jig. I built the jig separately. I'm going to post a separate video about how I built the jig later on. I finished the front and back of the drawers, as you can see. We have to be careful how we lay the piece upside down or the right side up. The outside face of the drawer should be facing up to make this cut. You can see very clean cuts. Sometimes due to router speed or a dull bit, you might get cutouts like this, basically cuts that's not completely sharp. And for that we use something very useful. This thing is amazingly useful, the painter's tape. So what I did is, for any cuts, and not just for the router cut, even for other kinds of cuts like on the miter saw or a circular saw or a table saw, it helps to just put the tape around like this, all the way around. So when I made the cut, these kind of chip offs or breaks don't happen. So I didn't use the tape on this one. You can see there's a little chip over here, but on this side I used the tape and you can see a clean cut. So that's another tip. Now I'm going to move on to the vertical cuts, the side drawers. I'm going to make the third and final adjustment for the router setup. Just to recap, the first adjustment I had made was 3/8 inch height from the router tabletop to the height of the blade, and which I haven't changed until now. The second adjustment I had made was to push the fence back for the horizontal cuts. I pushed the fence back exactly 1 plywood width distance from the outer tip of this blade, and I finished that. Now I'm going to do the third adjustment, for which I have to pull the fence forward to the to align it with the bottom edge of this blade. So the router tip has two edges. I'm calling this the outer edge and the inner edge. So the fence face has to be aligned with the inner edge of the blade. So all I'm doing is putting my gauge bar, or a ruler if I had it. I don't have one. So I put my gauge bar and I turn the router bit with my fingers to make sure that it's barely touching the gauge bar without pushing it forward. Or I also check if there is any kind of gap in between the gauge and the blade. But this is how I adjusted the fence, and now I'm ready for the vertical cuts, which is for the side walls of the drawer, the side panels of the drawers, of course. Again, I'm going to be using my jig to make the vertical cuts, and I'll post a separate video on how I made it later on. So here's my finished side panels. You can see it just made a notch, and that notch fits perfectly into the horizontal cuts that we made for the front and back. And that's how this should be fitting on all four corners. This is ready to glue on, but obviously I won't glue it yet because we still need to do the bottom of the drawer. Now I'm going to put this 1/4 inch thick bottom. I cut the bottom in such a way that it's about 3/8 of an inch wider on all sides, because I want it to travel inside a notch that I'm going to make. So I'm going to make a notch inside. I'm going to start from the bottom and mark a line about 1/4 of an inch, because I don't want to start at the bottom, of course. I'm going to mark a line about 1/4 of an inch high, and then I'm going to make a notch at this line, which is going to be 1/4 of an inch thick, of course, but it's going to be 3/8 of an inch deep. And I'm going to set up my router bit, a straight router bit, to do just that next. I set up my 1/4 inch straight bit. Now I'm going to use my trusty 3/8 of an inch gauge bar to make sure that the height of the bit is 3/8 of an inch. Maybe gave a little bit more height. Then I took my 1/4 inch gauge bar and made sure that the bit is 1/4 inch away from the fence. So I have, so the cut will be made 1/4 inch away from the bottom edge of the drawer. So here's the groove that I made. That's 3/8 of an inch deep. I can see that the groove is good, but it's a very tight fit. So I'm going to adjust the fence and push the fence maybe slightly a little back, so I make the groove wider so I can fit the board in easily. It needs to go in easily, snugly basically, not too tight, not too loose. So this is my dry assembled drawer. You can see the bottom. The only mistake I think I just realized I did is, if you see these slots over here and over here, it's only on the front and back panels. It's because when I was doing the rails or the notches for the front and back, I had passed this all the way across. The easy fix for that, and I know for next time, is when I pass this front and back on the router bit, I'm not going to start from the very beginning. I'm going to go a little bit behind and then do the pass for the notch. And also when I come out on the other side, I'm not going to come out all the way to the end, but I'm going to stop right here so that the notch is not seen. So that's an easy fix. That's something I've learned to do next time for the other drawers. Technically this drawer is ready for gluing, but I'm going to do a couple of things that I learned before I glue that will help me in the long run. The first thing is to sand these pieces, because once I glue it, it's impossible to sand properly on the inside. So I'll take this out and sand. The second interesting thing that some people do is to pre-stain or pre-finish this wood. Pre-finishing is, or pre-staining is basically chemicals that we apply to make it ready for staining. The advantage of that is when the glue comes out, it doesn't as easily stick to the wood because the stain is protecting it, or the pre-stain or the pre-finish is protecting it. And in the long run, it really helps when we actually put the final coat of stain. Glue marks are not easily seen. They're basically eliminated. One thing to remember when we apply clamps is to always apply them towards the corners of the drawers and not towards the middle of the drawers. It's been about an hour and the glue has dried fairly. Uh, this is what I was talking about earlier, the squeeze outs. And usually when we clamp it, the glue squeezes out, which is a good thing. But one thing I will never do is wipe the glue when it's wet, because when you wipe it, it's just going to get all over the wood and it's going to be visible when we stain it, and it's pretty ugly. So I'll wait until it's dry, and when it's fairly dry in an hour or two, I'm going to take a chisel and I'm just going to chisel the glue out when it's dry. That's the best way to handle it. But it still doesn't take out all the glue, but it takes out most of it. That's what I will do in all these squeeze outs. So this is my finished drawer, sanded and done. At this point, typically I would stop, but I'm going to do something different. I'm going to make these joints even more stronger, and I think this will be useful for larger drawers. So what I'm going to do is use a dowel. This is a 3/16 of an inch dowel. I'm going to insert them right over here, maybe 3 or 4 of them. For that, I'm going to use my gauge bar again. This is a 1/2 inch gauge bar, and I'm going to make a line right here, and use this line as my guide to drill a few holes 3/16 of an inch wide, and insert my dowel there. So here's the finished drawer with the dowels. I think it looks pretty, and I think this will be useful for making larger drawers to make the joint even more stronger. So some closing thoughts before I end. Number one, I used a 1/4 inch base, but for larger drawers I would probably use 1/2 inch base. But the concept remains the same. It will be 1/4 inch deep from below, and I'm going to make a trench that is 3/8 of an inch. Just the width will be 1/2 inch. The second thing is some people put edge banding on this. It's a tape of wood basically that sticks on top of this, so you don't see the layers of the plywood. I might edge band this. That's another consideration if I want a cleaner look, like a solid wood look on this. The third thing is about the dimensions of the drawer. So the dimension of the drawer has to be 1 inch less than the cabinet opening. So if the cabinet opening is 20 inches, the width of the edge to edge width of the face of the drawer should be absolutely exactly 19 inches, because 1 inch is taken up by the drawer slides on either side. The depth of the drawer could be anything up to the depth of the cabinet. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.